What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening, welcome to Neil Oliver Live. There are a few times in life when you feel as much of a disappointment as when you sit in for Neil Oliver, so I do apologise, but I did spend all day sketching this. I don't know whether you can see this. This is a lovely picture of Neil Oliver, the things you find in his fan mailbox, let me tell you. I feel like I should just leave him here so we all feel that he's still with us. We've got a cracking show tonight. After a week in which Nigel took on woke cancel culture, we're going to be asking what woke actually means, because I'm not sure that we have an agreement about what the definition of that word is and what has happened to society that means a bank has felt the need to kick out a customer based on their politics. Plus, one very special red telephone box. All of that and more coming up right after the latest news with Polly.
Bev, thank you and good evening to you. Our top story on GB News tonight is that 2 motorbikes have been recovered by police who are investigating a fatal hit-and-run incident in Walsall in the West Midlands. Sadly, 7-year-old Katlis Seleznev was taken to hospital in a critical condition following the collision on Thursday night, but she has since died of her injuries. A 14-year-old boy was arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving. He's now been released on bail, but there are strict conditions as inquiries continue. In other news today, rail services have been disrupted again today, with thousands of workers walking off the job in a long-running dispute over pay. RMT members at 14 train operating companies have been on strike, and passengers are being advised to check before they travel. In some areas, only half of services are running, others have none at all. In the United States, Republican presidential candidates have shared the stage for the first time as they fought for the support of those present at a rally in Iowa. Take a listen.
One could end up going to prison.
Interesting lyrics as to that song as former President Donald Trump stepped onto the stage there. Despite facing new criminal charges, Donald Trump was the one to hit out, though, at rival Ron DeSantis on stage, telling the crowd not to take a chance on the Florida governor. Will Hurd, the only candidate to criticise Mr. Trump publicly, but he was booed after saying the former president was running to stay out of prison. Donald Trump still claims he's the victim of a witch hunt.
If I weren't running, I would have nobody coming after me. Or if I was losing by a lot, I would have nobody coming after me. Together, we will crush crooked Joe Biden, the most crooked president in the history of our country by far, and also grossly incompetent, doesn't know what he's doing. He's destroying our country. We will win the election big, and we will make America great again. Thank you.
Trump speaking there. Now, a cargo ship carrying thousands of cars has been burning off the Dutch coast since Tuesday night. One crew member died and 7 others were injured when they tried to jump overboard to escape the flames. The Dutch Coast Guard is saying the cause of the fire isn't yet known, but in a recording released by the broadcaster RTL locally, an emergency responder can be heard saying it started in the battery of an electric car on board. The vessel, which was travelling from Germany to Egypt, is now just drifting. Here, Labour has accused the government of an unforgivable lack of urgency over the needs of rape victims. It says the Tory party's failed to implement key recommendations made in 2 reports from 2021. The Criminal Justice Joint Inspectorate has urged the government to launch specialist rape courts and give victims the opportunity to make personal statements. Environmental groups are warning the Prime Minister they won't stand by if ministers attempt to water down environmental and climate commitments. A joint letter has been sent to Rishi Sunak from organisations which include the National Trust and the RSPB, and they say they could mobilise their membership, and they're demanding an urgent meeting. It comes after Conservative success in the Uxbridge and South Ruislip by-election led some MPs to call for a rethink over the push for net zero by 2050. Happier news now. A former paratrooper has completed a 19,000-mile charity walk all around the UK along the coastal paths. Chris Lewis was joined by hundreds of supporters as he crossed the finish line, finally at the beach at Llangennith in Wales. The father of 2 has so far raised £500,000 for SAFA, the Soldiers, Sailors and Airmen Families Association. Mr Lewis set off from the same spot 6 years ago with only a few supplies and £10 in his pocket. He said he never stopped believing in himself.
The main lesson of all is you know, certainly for people that have been suffering with any mental health issues, is to have a focus, you know, something that you can focus on and just pursue it. Don't let anybody tell you you can't, and you know, have a bit of faith in yourself. All the parts of this journey where people said that I shouldn't do it, it's never been done or anything like this, they're the parts that I love the most. So if I'd have listened to them, I would have missed out on all of that.
And finally, thousands of people have taken part in Belfast's largest ever Pride Parade today. This year's theme was Stand By Your Trans, with more than 250 groups signing up for the event. Police officers were asked not to wear their uniforms, but Police Service Northern Ireland said we've got impartiality to adhere to. Meanwhile, in Liverpool, crowds took to the streets as the city hosted Pride on behalf of Ukraine. The city also held the Eurovision Song Contest for the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, in May this year. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, this is Bev sitting in for Neil tonight. Now, it has been a busy 2 weeks here at GB News because we haven't just been reporting the headlines. We've been making them thanks to our very own Nigel Farage losing his bank account because his views, quote, do not align with the values of Coots. Of course, like all modern-day authoritarians, Coots do not feel the need to explain what their values are. They are simply good and right, whilst Farage is bad and wrong. So I wonder if, like me, you're interested in how we've got to this place in the UK where huge corporations operate along such simplistic binary lines and are allowed to punish those who might disagree. The subsequent resignation of senior banking executives is, in my opinion, welcome and extremely rare at a time when most public figures act with absolute impunity when it comes to behaviour. And all credit to fearless Farage, who's now given courage to thousands of individuals who've suffered the same humiliating fate and is now spearheading a push for legal changes. And because Nigel's experience preempts a future in which access to financial services could be indiscriminately snatched away, he's also forcing national news outlets to finally talk about impending central banking digital currencies tied to social credit systems. Until now, the only place you'd hear that spoken about was right here, right now, thanks to Neil Oliver. But at its heart, this is a story about power. Who has it and who doesn't? And critically, what has changed in our culture to empower a bank to defenestrate a customer based on an entirely subjective conclusion about their character, traits which the bank felt at liberty to analyse around a boardroom of the Reputational Risk Committee and document in a 40-page dossier which concluded that Nigel Farage was racist, homophobic and a man of poor judgment because he was friends with famous COVID jab rejecter tennis champion Novak Djokovic. What makes this even more chilling is that Nigel knew nothing about this process and was never given a right to defend himself. But also, what cloak of invincibility did Dame Alison Rose think she was wearing when she gossiped about Nigel's finances at a dinner with BBC journalist Simon Jack, brazenly breaking data protection law? In a nutshell, this is a story of the woke versus the awake, and which side emerges victorious will have consequences for us all. But I don't know about you, but I've been a bit frustrated this week by commentators describing Nigel as a victim of woke cancel culture, because there is very little agreement on what woke actually means. It's a slippery 4 letters which evades an easy definition. And I firmly believe that's why the forces of woke have been able to get their claws so firmly into our institutions and practically dominate every aspect of our lives, from banking to pronouns, from HR disputes in regional offices to who qualifies for Olympic finals. The ripples of anonymous social justice warriors reverberate everywhere, from policing to publishing. But we need to agree on a definition of woke, because it's impossible to take on an enemy when their shape shifts and their intent dodges the crosshairs. Even people who proudly categorise all humans through a hierarchy of identity politics and champion diversity, gender neutrality and LGBT rights would never actually describe themselves as woke. And no doubt behind many of these initiatives is good intention to encourage equality of opportunity and to minimise discrimination based on immutable characteristics. But speak out against some of these cultural dictators and you will find yourself outcast and silenced. The very people who claim to be driven by inclusivity have found 100 ways to leave people who don't ascribe to a very narrow set of clunky beliefs out in the cold. So what's the history of the word woke? Well, it was first used in a 1938 protest song, Scottsboro Boys, about 7 young black men wrongly imprisoned for the rape of 2 white women in Arkansas, and warned African Americans to keep one eye open to threat. Singer Erykah Badu kept the phrase alive in her music until 2014, when Black Lives Matter started the social media trend #StayWoke after the killing of Michael Brown. Again, it was a call to the threat of police brutality, but rapidly encompassed all forms of social injustice. By 2016, it was quite cool to be woke, with celebrities briefly admitting to the label. The Oxford English Dictionary included it with the definition, well-informed, up-to-date, and alert to racial or social discrimination and justice. But then Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey wore the slogan on a T-shirt, and the backlash came quickly. Derided in memes and commercialised, within 12 months, woke had a new definition in the Urban Dictionary. The act of being very pretentious about how much you care about a social issue. Today, no business brags about being woke, despite the minefields about what a woman is. No political party stands on a self-confessed woke manifesto. So why do businesses like Coutts feel authorised to punish someone who is unashamedly anti-woke? Well, it all started with Tony Blair and Bill Clinton as they tried to blend centre-right economic policies with centre-left social policies. Nationalising corporate entities was unpopular, but these leaders still longed for control. And so they implemented a greater regulation into businesses, which still lingers today. But it was all a little obvious. So more insidiously came the soft pressure, irresistible grants, incentives, the powerful code of conduct enshrined in every company's ESG policy, environmental and social governance. In other words, demonstrate how good and kind your business is, not just how profitable. You must be hitting green targets, diversity quotas, charitable objectives. And this has literally become a competition between businesses seeking out investors who look over their shoulder to check that they appear to be the most ethical. But it's all superficial, time-wasting nonsense. Greenwashing, pinkwashing, brownwashing, tokenistic, doing the right thing whilst making wealthy professionals feel better about themselves and impress other cultural elites at Davos drinks and parties on yachts. There are still only 6 women CEOs of FTSE 100 companies, so don't try and tell me that all these efforts to generate gender equality have been a success. But gaming this system is profitable. Headhunters scour CVs for virtue signalling above work ethic. Ticking woke boxes is a lazy way to add value to a business. It's much easier to host a Pride-themed coffee morning than ask your team to put in a 12-hour shift to hit a deadline. Social activism conceals a lot of weak leadership. So we need a counter-revolution, a fight back against the politicisation of commercial life, and a return to a time when the customer was always right and the business needed to do nothing more than offer a good product or service at the right price. My 86-year-old dad recently asked me what woke means, so I told him to read this. He's a very wise man of few words, but after reading it, he shook his head and he said, they'll look back and they'll say, what was wrong with everybody then? I hope he's right. So to help me work out what woke is and what to do about it, I'm joined tonight by Molly and Ben Kingsley from children's lobby group Us for Them and Professor Eric Hines, author of The Most Human Right, Why Free Speech is Everything. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. Molly, let me come to you. You've also been a victim of this cancel culture with Us for Them, your group. You also were deprived of bank account. So what did you, or PayPal, wasn't it, in your case? PayPal. What did you make of my assessment of woke and where we are with it?
So, I mean, I think you're entirely right. I think perhaps we're conflating issues here because, you know, when we think of woke, I think some of us would think of actually the underlying values which woke would try and progress. So, you know, things which in themselves may be very admirable and, you know, may be beneficial and in some cases undoubtedly are. So, you know, gender equality, racial equality, sustainability, if done sensibly, I think are aspirations many of us would agree with. But I think woke has been taken to mean something rather different to that. I mean, you mentioned this idea of, you know, maintaining your allegiance to these values in a very pretentious way. I would say it's more than pretentious, actually. It's a compelled way. It's this idea of forced righteousness, and alongside that, the refusal to countenance any dissent from these values, which I think has become so sinister. So in our case, we were, debanked from PayPal for, well, actually, we don't really know what our particular thought crime was. We just know we were guilty of thought crimes. All we got told was we can't use their facilities anymore because of the nature of our activities. And we still haven't had any explanation.
Which is extraordinary, Ben, if I can come to you. So just tell people what Us For Them do, if they don't know. I'm sure a lot of our viewers will be familiar, but for those who don't know, what evil organisation is it that might be banned from using PayPal?
Yeah, well, you'll see how desperately evil we are. We're a grassroots organisation, parents and grandparents predominantly, and we've campaigned for the last few years on issues affecting children's welfare and well-being. And so during the pandemic, we were particularly active on the topic of school closures, the masking of children in schools and such things.
But you never had actual clarification from PayPal that was why that service was removed from you?
Correct. We had less than one line of an explanation as to why the services were shut down. And of course, we've been, as in the way that Nigel has done, we've been trying to wheedle out from PayPal the reasons why they've done it, but they're remaining very tight-lipped.
Eric, let me come to you because, of course, when you listen to stories like this, you realise it took somebody with such a high profile as Nigel Farage to shine a light on this problem where small organisations, charities, in fact, also can be affected in this way. Were you aware that it was going on behind the scenes, and can you understand why?
Yeah, well, and the organisation that sent me today, the Media Diversity Institute, based here in London, they know from their own experience and from the experience of other NGOs that they do need to report to their banks about where money is shifting, even if they're trying to shift money for charitable purposes, for humanitarian causes. And often it's not a very transparent process. Yeah. And so this is one reason why, this hurts people across the political spectrum.
So how do we keep, because as you say, you representing the Media Diversity Organisation, how do we keep those issues in moving along? Because we would all agree that we want to live in a world where people aren't discriminated against on the immutable characteristics I was saying, but without it becoming a sort of cultural tyranny, which is what a lot of us feel that we now live in. Big question, I know.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I think I have found very few people across the political spectrum disagreeing that someone should have a bank account, actually. It seems to me that from left to right, everyone has conceded this point. And so, obviously, an essential service should not be at risk. Once these sorts of essential services are secure, then people do have every reason to feel secure in voicing their own opinions, because that threat should not be looming over anyone, no matter where they are on the political spectrum.
But it's the pressure of diversity, inclusivity, as we've been saying. It's the pressure, particularly from the trans activists, that I feel that movement is incredibly. I'd almost go so far as to say aggressive, actually, at times. You only have to look at the experience of J.K. Rowling. But how have we got to the point where people can have basic services like bank accounts taken off them? Like, how have we pushed that pendulum so far in that direction?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, it's true that businesses do worry about their associations, about who's affiliated with them, about the kind of reputations that they have. But again, sorry?
Should they be worried?
Yes, they should be worried about their corporate ethics. They should be worried about how they act in the world and the effects they have on the world. They should be worried about their relationships with the broader community. But people should not be denied essential services. And those two are compatible.
And it feels like it's a tipping point, doesn't it? Like that conversation now, we've realised that how far that pendulum has swung, I think, this week. Molly, do you agree with me?
I think that's right. I mean, I think the term that we've used about this is progressive discrimination. Like, that's where we are now. It's an action that we wouldn't have considered legitimate being authorised under the banner of progressive values. It doesn't make it any less wrong.
Yeah. OK, thanks, guys, for kicking us off. Right, coming up still this evening, we're going to be carrying on this conversation. I'm going to be talking to the author, in fact, of How Woke Won, Joanna Williams. Don't go anywhere.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Bev Turner in for Neil Oliver tonight. I know it's a disappointment, but what can you do? It's disappointing for me as well. I'd normally be sat at home watching him. Now, before the break, we were discussing what woke actually means, and I'm joined now by the author of How Woke Won, Joanna Williams. Good evening, Jo. Thank you for joining us. I know you're at a conference this evening. So you heard me, maybe you heard me talking at the top of the show about the definition of woke. And do you feel that it's a word that is fully understood? Because I think there's a huge amount of confusion and ambiguity around it. And I don't think language works unless we all agree on what the words mean.
No, I think you're absolutely right. There is a lot of confusion around this word, but I think people instinctively know woke when they see it. We know when we're being force-fed a diet of diversity that we didn't sign up to, when we're being force-fed inclusion, when we're being kicked out of our bank accounts. We recognise when we come up against things that are going on in society that we haven't actually voted for, that we didn't actually ask to be part of, that we feel as if are being kind of pushed upon us. So I think we do recognise it when we see it. But the beauty, if you like, of woke for the advocates of these policies is that they can then stand back and deny. They can say, oh, no, we're not woke. There's no such thing as woke. You don't even know what the word means. So how can you complain about these things?
I'm fascinated by this idea, Joe, that a word that is so powerful and yet nobody will claim to be it, and yet it underpins so much of our life, as I was saying at the top of the show. Do you ever come across anybody in your work as an academic or in writing this book who would see themselves as woke and say proudly, yes, I am a woke person, I represent these values, I live them?
I mean, I think a few years ago, definitely. Now what you get more is people saying, well, of course some people will say, of course I'm woke. And we've even had police officers coming out and saying, well, why wouldn't you be woke? But then they follow that up by saying, well, because all woke means is that you're interested in equality, you're not racist, you're not sexist, you're not homophobic. So who could possibly be against this? Who would be anti-woke? But I have a problem with that, because I think that's actually really disingenuous. You know, I'm not racist, I'm not sexist, I'm not homophobic, but I wouldn't describe myself as woke, because what woke means is something more than that. It implies an element of coercion, an element of compulsion, and a kind of authoritarian approach to really enforcing a specific set of values upon people.
How significant is it, Joe, that Nigel Farage has blown a hole in this corporate culture this week?
I think it's massive, and I think he's done everybody a favour by really exposing what's going on here. I mean, I absolutely take my hat off to him. It's something which is badly needed, because I think what it shows is the fact that it doesn't really matter if no individuals go around calling themselves woke, because what we've got is the complete institutionalisation of a set of values. These values have been incorporated as part of a kind of bureaucracy that we have to confront in our everyday lives now. And, you know, on the one hand, it's just incredibly foolish to have taken away Nigel Farage's bank account. You know, he's a well-known public figure. He's a major feature of the international political stage. So the sheer arrogance that led them to think they could get away with doing this without there being a backlash, I think really speaks again to the authoritarianism of the people who are driving this agenda.
One thing that really struck me from your book, Joe, is that whilst we're talking about skin colour and gender to some degree as well, the one thing that I think does hold people back in life in terms of opportunity is actually social class. And that gets cast into the shadow, doesn't it, in so many of these conversations of around woke. And that's something I think we should probably be committing more time to think about. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And I think in some ways that's the beauty of woke values for the people who run elite institutions, that it allows them to present themselves as being very politically correct, very in favour of equality, at the same time without really making any difference whatsoever to the way that society is organised. Poor people will stay poor because the woke agenda is not going to have any impact upon that whatsoever. You know, they can play around and tinker and kind of bedeck banks in rainbow flags, but people without money will still be people without money.
What's the next stage for woke in our culture? I mean, it's different, I would say, next week than it would have been 2 weeks ago if this hadn't all happened. What do you predict happening now, Joe?
Well, one thing that really heartens me is I think the only way really to push back and challenge woke is through democracy, is through the ballot box. And I think obviously we saw with Brexit, we've seen even with the recent by-election and the way that that's led people to question the whole expansion of ULEZ, the low emission traffic zone. I think democracy is actually pushing our political leaders to question the values that they've been promoting. And I think that's a really positive development. I think the more people see of woke, the less they like it. And now we just need the opportunity to be able to put these things to the test in the ballot box. And, you know, I think a great thing that's come out of what Nigel Farage's experience with Coutts is that it's helped to shine that kind of sunlight, the disinfectant that comes with sunlight, and actually expose what's going on and bring it home to people. And I think another important thing that happened, you know, that's really worth a mention is the fact that this happened to Gina Miller too, you know, who was was the pro-Remain person, who really pushed that. And I think that showed people on the left who were arguing, this is just a Nigel Farage problem, that actually it's not. This is a problem of banks and our institutions. And if this could happen to Nigel Farage, if it could happen to Gina Miller, this could happen to any one of us. So it's in all of our interests to be pushing back and challenging what's going on here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jo. Joanna Williams there, author of How Woke Won. If you want to understand it in more detail, I thoroughly recommend it. Thank you, Joanna, for joining us this evening. Ben, when we're talking then about what the implications of this might be, I mentioned at the top as well about we're moving very rapidly, I think, behind the scenes towards a central banking digital currency, a financial system. And finance is your background, I think. So it's a financial system which may come with conditions attached, as it does in other countries such as China. Do you think this conversation now that we're having makes that less likely because people are suddenly aware?
I think this has been a big awakening moment, certainly for the public, and I think it will be also for the corporate world.
Yeah.
What Nigel has done that others before didn't have the profile to achieve is, as you say, as Jo has said, is shine a light. And I think what's particularly pernicious about the way that NatWest, Coots and doubtless others have gone about this is that it's been in the dark, as you said in your opening monologue. It's in shady boardrooms where these decisions get made, and I think transparency is what we need.
Yeah.
But,
Eric, can I just ask you about what I mentioned to Jo then about social class? So we would all agree that we all want all people to get on, and we all want to find more reasons to bring human beings together rather than divide us. And I think that's one thing that we maybe haven't touched upon, is that the problem with a lot of woke culture is it feels divisive. It's pointing out the difference all the time, and I want to bring people together. But when it comes to social class, particularly in terms of opportunities in this country, that's a conversation we don't have enough, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the entire so-called woke movement, or if you just want to call it a kind of ongoing history of leftism, has always been about social class from its very origins, and I don't think that ever left the agenda. And I think, people who one would identify with wokeism are absolutely involved in pushing for greater economic opportunity, educational opportunity, everything that has to do with social class.
Yeah.
So I would not set those up as opposites, woke versus social class. I don't think this has ever been the case. And in fact, I would also go back to something that Joanna talked about, this idea of a woke tyranny. There have always been these tyrannies in social life, in institutions. I mean, were there no tyrannies back in the days when our institutions were all white men? Was that not also a kind of tyranny? And so of course we want less coercion. Of course we want to be able to speak our mind without a fear of unfair repercussions. Yes, but I don't think we should over-egg the way we're describing wokeism.
But I think in terms of that particular sort of patriarchal tyranny, which is what you're describing, we were all aware of that. We all knew that. We knew that if women didn't get a bank account, there was a reason why a woman didn't get a bank account. I mean, we're going back many, many years. But it's very different to what I think we're subjected to now, isn't it, in terms of discrimination? I mean, we're sitting here talking about the fact that a wealthy, successful man wasn't allowed to bank based on his values. That's very different.
Yeah. But I think we've all pretty much agreed that he should have his bank account. Again, I've seen no one really disagreeing with this.
Yeah. But funny enough, we have. Like we've seen some people in the media. There's a couple of BBC presenters who seem to think it was nothing particularly to get excited about. We're a little bit snooty about people. But anyway, we've got to move on, guys. Sorry about that. Still to come, how debanking isn't just a UK phenomenon. I'm going to be joined all the way from South Florida by Dr. Joe McCullough, who JP Morgan Chase saw fit to cancel for his views on the pandemic. Before that, though, let's have a quick check on that very important weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Hope you were able to enjoy some of the sunny spells we did have around today, but there are still some showers lingering on tonight and into tomorrow, particularly for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, where there's still the chance that some of those could be heavy. A few pushing into Western England, Wales, through the Bristol Channel area, but eastern areas of England generally staying drier with some clear intervals. It's not going to be too chilly overnight for most of us, holding up around 12 to 14 degrees Celsius, might drop into single figures across the far northeast of Scotland. Showers from the word go as well for central Scotland, pushing their way down further south into northern England as well. Still the chance that they could be heavy, maybe the odd rumble of thunder during the day as well. For the southwest, though, we are going to see the cloud building as outbreaks of rain push their way in for Wales, southwest England, then into Northern Ireland and eventually southeast England later on as well. Where you do hold on to the sunshine, though, climbing to highs around 21, 22 degrees Celsius. That area of low pressure that's bringing this rain will steadily be progressing its way eastwards overnight. Light winds further to the north where those isobars are spaced well apart but squeezing together across the south. Really quite breezy first thing on Monday morning, potential for 40-mile-an-hour gusts along some coast of the English Channel. These outbreaks of rain still lingering in places as well. A few brighter spells for central England, but the best of the sunshine certainly reserved for northern areas of Scotland. And there'll be further showers as we do head into the rest of the week as well. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live with me, Bev Turner. Now, I'm delighted to say that we're going to take this debate stateside, as it's not only here that banking services are being ripped away from controversial figures. Dr. Joe McCullough had his Chase bank accounts in the US taken away, as well as those of his CEO, CFO and family members. And Dr. McCullough joins me now from Florida. Hi, Joe. Great to see you. Thank you for joining us. I'm interested to know, firstly, why these accounts were closed and what have the effects been on you and your colleagues?
Well, interestingly, we're also interested to find out and understand why they closed, because they refused to disclose that to us. even though after repeated requests, they have not given us any definitive answers. We can only speculate as to what those reasons are. And it's impacted our employees quite significantly. One of our CFO has a disabled husband who's requires 24/7 care. He's in the Philippines, and his bank account is intimately tied and connected with his ability to receive this care. So it's been an enormous hardship, and it's unfair for someone. There is just no justification for this type of action that we can understand and find.
You very much swam against the tide of public opinion during the pandemic, didn't you, Dr. McCullough? And presumably that must be partly why this decision has been taken.
Well, I think it's a pretty safe speculation. But yes, I was awarded the badge of honor of being the #1 spreader of COVID misinformation in 2021 by the Biden administration and the White House and the press secretaries and the NIH. So I was very pleased for that. We had Bobby Kennedy running for the president in 2024. He was also on the list. He was #2. So, there's a high likelihood that had something to do with it, especially in light of the fact that the federal government seems to be in collusion with the banks. And just recently, the large regional bank in the United States went belly up, and the federal government decided to transfer that banking assets to Chase. And you have to speculate and wonder, maybe it has something to do with coordinating efforts that the government wants. So we don't know. We have no proof. It's only pure speculation, but it's certainly a possibility.
Your tweet about this has been viewed more than about 10.5 million times. You're very popular on social media. But is this sort of travesty making the mainstream media in America at all? Or is it like here, until a week ago, it was solely the preserve of social media?
That's a great question. I really can't comment accurately on that because I don't look at mainstream media. I've long realized and understood that the information they spread is it's Orwellian doublespeak, and you can almost trust anything they're saying is the exact opposite of what the truth is. So I don't watch mainstream media. I will review the New York Times and the Washington Post just to make sure to understand what the narrative they're trying to push on the public. But other than that, I just am not connected to that in any way, shape, or form.
So has your organisation and the people who work for it been able to just simply go out and get new bank accounts? Is it just a little inconvenience, or has it really hit them hard?
Yeah, it's more than a little inconvenience. It's a major inconvenience. And I mean, the business is the business, and they've given us a month to transfer accounts. So, and they're in the process of doing it. It's just a lot of extra unnecessary work. And I can't speak to the specifics of what's going on with my CFO and her husband, but I'm hoping that it's not going to interfere and impair his ability to continue to receive care.
Do you have any form of recourse, Joe? Do you have any means of getting justice? I mean, here, Nigel Farage happens to be such a huge figure that he has a public voice. Whereas you as a physician, as I say, you're very popular on social media, but you probably don't have the hotline to the banks or the national newspapers.
We've had many millions on social media, but as you know, as a result of the pandemic, they essentially deplatformed us. So most of our social media presence is really from my previous awareness by the public, and then other people that knew of me retweeted that message, so they were aware of what was going on. But the recourse we have is we filed a complaint with the State Attorney General of Florida, and there's high likelihood that it will be some action on that front. And also, the state of Florida, where our business is and I live, has recently passed legislation forbidding this type of discrimination. So we're hoping that will play some impact and probably be escalating this to the Governor Ron DeSantis.
Well, I was just going to say, you have probably the most sympathetic governor in America when it comes to this issue in Ron DeSantis. Have you contacted him about this yet?
I believe our staff has, yes.
Yeah.
But he's obviously in the middle of a busy campaign.
He's got quite a lot on.
Yeah.
But do you have any idea whether you are an isolated case or how many others? Because here, what's happened is Nigel Farage has gone public with his story and has been inundated with thousands of people and organisations who've been victims of the same sort of cancel culture. Do you have any idea whether you are in a similar position there?
I don't know if it's as massive as it is over there with Nigel's case. I have heard some stories, but I don't know how pervasive it is. And I don't know what type of targeting they're implementing or what justification they're using to do this. As I said, we've asked and requested the information. They've just refused to provide us other than a nebulous generic statement that means absolutely nothing, because they've refused to provide any specific detail.
Terrifying. Absolutely chilling. Dr. Joseph McCullough, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I think the work you've done has been phenomenal over the last couple of years. So I'm very happy to shine a light on your situation here. Molly Kingsley, it makes my blood run cold.
Oh, it makes my blood run cold. I mean, that sounds very, very familiar, particularly the bit about the lack of transparency. So, you know, we are a year down the line from PayPal. It isn't the same what they did to us. That is a far more serious situation. They are targeting individuals' bank accounts. You know, that never happened in the same way to us. But actually, the thought that you can just have your access to funding cut off at, you know, the whim of a bank or the government, ? So I think one thing that we thought at the time is it wasn't just us for them, of course, it was the Free Speech Union. There were a couple of other accounts that in the UK that were closed within days of each other.
Yeah.
And we've never got to the bottom of whether that was coordinated or whether it was coincidence. I think we have our suspicions. And yeah, it makes your blood run cold. It shouldn't have happened, and it should have received attention long before it did in the UK.
Kafka-esque, isn't it? Right, guys, we're going to take another quick break, but we're going to be doing something completely different after the break. It involves a very special telephone box. Now, if you're under 30, ask an old person what a phone box was while we take a very short break. Don't go away.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities.
especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live with me, Bev Turner, this evening. Now, few things are as symbolic of our changing times than a red telephone box. I get nostalgic for carrying a 10-pence piece in my back pocket, or even just letting my mum's phone ring twice so she knew to pick me up. But now let's hear about one of the few remaining phone boxes that stands on the platform at Chalfont and Latimer London Underground Station from Councillor Martin Tetz. Good evening, Martin. Tell us about this iconic red box. Why is this one so special?
Hi there, Bev. Well, I've lived out here in Little Chalfont, oh gosh, since the early 80s. I remember almost when you used to put a shilling in the slot rather than a 10-pence piece. But what happens here is that on the railway station, we've got a very, very special telephone box. It's not one of the iconic red ones that you're probably thinking about. This is a slightly different, slightly mauvey colour, and it's one of what was 11,000 of them that used to be all across the railway network. They'd allow the staff to talk to each other, you know, the days before mobile phones and all this sort of stuff. And by and large, they've all gone. There's only 4 left now in the entire railway network, and this is the only one in Buckinghamshire. So it's now a Grade 2 listed monument.
How has it managed to not end up in a skip at some point?
Well, I think it's just been very lucky, to be honest with you. It's very tempting. I mean, I used to work in London, so I used to go to the station every morning, and I'd pass this thing, and every now and again I'd see somebody, you know, a member of staff sort of lounging inside it. And I'm not sure I ever remember it being used, if I'm honest with you, all the time since the early 80s. I can't remember anyone actually ever picking up the phone in there. But it was certainly, you know, all decked out. But they've all gone. You know, this is the only one in Bucks. It's one of 4 on the entire network. Out of 11,000. I mean, that's a lot of telephone kiosks. So I think it's just been exceptionally lucky. Either that, or it's a bit like the Doctor Who TARDIS. You get inside it and it just sort of dematerialises when the junkmen came round.
I'm looking at the picture of it on the screen here, Martin. It looks a bit like the windows smashed on the telephone box, but I presume it isn't. Is that sort of frosted glass and then you can see through to the phone?
Yeah, you can see the phone inside. And that's exactly how you see it when you go there. It's just the way it was. It's been very well preserved over the years, which is why we've given it the listing we have. So it's a pretty iconic thing. It'd be sad to see it go. But I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you, what's going to happen in 5 and 10 years' time, because you know, nobody else under about 30 or 40 now remembers what on earth a telephone box was.
Well, exactly. Well, you've preserved it now forever. Anybody that's got a listed building knows they can be an absolute pain in the posterior when you try to do anything to them. So you've made someone's life a nightmare in the next few years if they want to do anything with that station. But I think that's all for the good. You are preserving a bit of history here.
Well, it's not like there are thousands or hundreds of them left. I mean, given that there's only 4 of them in the entire country, and, as I said, the only one in Bucks, we just thought it was worth putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is worthy of listing. It doesn't mean they can't, redecorate the station or whatever. They've just got to basically make sure that they take care of that telephone kiosk.
Yeah, well done. Councillor Martin Tett there, preserving a little bit of history for future generations. Thank you so much for joining us. Molly, I long for the days when my kids don't have a mobile phone and they'll go and use a phone box. Do you think they'll ever come back?
Oh, I do. I mean, I've said it jokingly, but we, as you know, Usman has this anti-smartphone for kids campaign. Yeah. And when we launched, we expected it to be really controversial. Everyone kept telling us it was impossible. Kids need phones. Oh, don't do that. You're mad. Everyone will hate you. Well, I tell you what, we have never had a more positive response generally to a campaign. Like, people accept this is a problem at the moment without a solution. So, my prediction in a few years is we will have some kind of wise phone, let's say, which is a slimmed down phone, particularly for children. You can call people on it, you can text, maybe we'll chuck in a weather app. Yeah. None of the other nonsense, and we will all be much happier.
Do you think that's a vision of the future you would support, Eric, where we all lose our mobile phones and go back to
Telephones, landlines?
I vote for wise phones.
Yeah. I think that, well, it's very wise. It's a very wise note to end it on, really.
It sounds like the safe option.
It does, doesn't it? I think so. I mean, we've seen statues pulled down the last few years because of our woke agenda we were talking about. I quite like it, Ben, when you see an image of the past being retained like that.
Yeah, it's true heritage, isn't it?
Yeah.
Quirky though it is, and this sort of thing does need protection, because we see, as you say, the statues can disappear in an instant with no consequences. And
well, one of the things that struck me when we was researching the show today was when the Coulson statue was pulled down in Bristol, the woman who did so said she wanted to look the statue in the eyes, which I thought was hilarious, and it kind of sums up some of the insanity of the woke stuff we've been talking about tonight. It's only a statue. Professor Eric Hines, Ben and Molly Kingsley, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I've had a lovely time sitting in for Neil. He's still here. Look, here is his lovely poster that somebody, this picture of him that somebody did, self-portrait. Coming up next is the Common Sense Crusade. I'll be back on Monday morning at 9:30. See you then.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Hope you were able to enjoy some of the sunny spells we did have around today, but there are still some showers lingering on tonight and into tomorrow, particularly for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, where there's still the chance that some of those could be heavy. A few pushing into Western England, Wales, through the Bristol Channel area, but eastern areas of England generally staying drier with some clear intervals. It's not going to be too chilly overnight for most of us, holding up around 12 to 14 degrees Celsius, might drop into single figures across the far northeast of Scotland. Showers from the word go as well for central Scotland, pushing their way down further south into northern England as well. Still the chance that they could be heavy, maybe the odd rumble of thunder during the day as well. For the southwest, though, we are going to see the cloud building as outbreaks of rain push their way in for Wales, southwest England, then into Northern Ireland and eventually southeast England later on as well. Where you do hold on to the sunshine, though, climbing to highs around 21, 22 degrees Celsius. That area of low pressure that's bringing this rain will steadily be progressing its way eastwards overnight. Light winds further to the north where those isobars are spaced well apart but squeezing together across the south. Really quite breezy first thing on Monday morning, potential for 40-mile-an-hour gusts along some coast of the English Channel. These outbreaks of rain still lingering in places as well. A few brighter spells for central England, but the best of the sunshine certainly reserved for northern areas of Scotland. And there'll be further showers as we do head into the rest of the week as well. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.